Okay, let's go back to our lecture. All right, this is sports nutrition part 2. This is the slide we ended on. It is just a refresher of everything that was talked about in the slides previous. So let's move on to protein. So the body really doesn't like to use protein for energy. It can and it will, but it doesn't like to because protein is what makes us. It's our organs are mostly protein, our muscles. So it doesn't make sense to use protein for energy. We'd just be cannibalizing ourselves. That all said, we can use some of our amino acids to make energy. So there are some of the 20 amino acids, some are considered, or some are rather, glucogenic, which means we can generate glucose from them. And those, for our purposes, are the branched chain amino acids. Leucine is spelled incorrectly, but this is leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And really, most of us only use about 5% of the total energy that we expend in a given day is from protein. And again, because the body much prefers to use carbohydrate and then fat, and then if it needs to, it uses some of these glucogenic amino acids. Now, a well-trained endurance athlete can actually use more protein. And that is because it's important that they delay the use of tapping into those glycogen stores. So just like we saw that well-trained athletes can use more fatty acids in their muscle, the better trained an athlete is, the more able they are, the more efficient they are at using glycogenic amino acids for energy. All right, what athletes do need protein for is for muscle building. Well, we all need it, but athletes more than the rest of us. That said, eating more protein than what the body actually needs is not going to help you build more muscle. So if you say, you know what, on Monday I'm going to start, I'm going to bulk up on Monday and I'm going to eat tons of protein. If you're not challenging your muscles with weight training activity, that protein's going to have nowhere to go, and it's just going to be converted as fat if it's above your caloric needs. So when you are building muscle mass, yes, you need a little bit more protein than you did before you started your weight training or your weightlifting. But the fuel that you're going to use to build those muscles is carbohydrate and then a little bit of phosphocreatine. So having a hard carbohydrate, moderate protein food after weight training can actually enhance your anabolic effect, your muscle building effect. Because this type of meal will increase your insulin and growth hormones, which contribute to protein synthesis. And I'll give you a little bit more detail on some great snacks to have after working out to build muscle mass. So just another little refresher on the macronutrients that we've talked about. So let's start in the middle with carbohydrate. The end goal is making ATP for our muscles, adenosine triphosphate. That's what we really want to do. That's the currency our muscles recognize. That's what we want to make. So if we're making that ATP from carbohydrate, which is the body's preferred source, the first thing we're going to do is break that carbohydrate down into glucose using glycolysis or lysing those glucose molecules, send the byproducts, including acetyl-CoA, into the citric acid cycle, which will make ATP. If there is no oxygen available, it's anaerobic, so we make a little ATP. If there's oxygen available, we will make a lot of ATP per glucose molecule. Any extra carbohydrate we will store as glycogen in the liver and in the big muscles, and then we can tap into that glycogen when we need it later. Next, the next preferred energy source is fat, dietary fat, so from the foods that we eat, but we also store fat in our cells. So this is a new term, beta oxidation. That's the breakdown of a fatty acid to be used to make acetyl-CoA, to go into the citric acid cycle to make ATP. So again, our muscles cannot use a fatty acid for energy. We have to convert that fatty acid all through these processes to make ATP. So I'll say it again, with fatty acids, we break them down in a process called beta oxidation. The byproducts of that beta oxidation of that fatty acid molecule enter the citric acid cycle, and we get a lot of ATP. And then we can use a little bit of protein for energy. We don't really like to. It's just the glucogenic amino acids. We have to pop off the nitrogen group. This carbon skeleton is converted to acetyl-CoA and can enter the citric acid cycle, again, making our pal ATP. But the body really only likes to, or the body prefers to use that protein to build itself up and to maintain itself, not necessarily for energy production. All right, so just a refresher on the AMDR, or the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for regular, so non-athlete adults. So remember, the recommendation for carbs is 45 to 65% of total calories, 20 to 35% of total fat, and 10 to 35% of our diet should be coming from protein. So let's look at and see if there are any changes for the athlete. All right, so the advice for athletes varies very widely depending on how well trained the athlete is and the type of athlete, so what the sport actually is. So generally, carbohydrate needs are about 5 to 10 grams per kilo of body weight. So if you wanted to calculate that for yourself, you take your weight in pounds and divide by 2.2, and then multiply 2.2 by 5, and then multiply, you have your weight in kilos, so your weight divided by 2.2, you get your weight in kilograms, multiply that number by 5, and that's the lowest number if you were an athlete for carbohydrates you want to eat in a day, up to 10 grams per kilogram. So if an athlete's needs are 2,000 calories a day and she weighs 70 kilos, she needs between 380 and 680 grams of carbohydrate. Those numbers should mean absolutely nothing to you, so I included this carb counting. This is for patients with diabetes, but it's just an idea of how many carbohydrates are in a given serving. So all of these contain 15 grams of carbohydrate, all these examples below. And that just gives you a frame of reference. So 380 to 680, at least it gives you a frame of reference. What does 15 look like? So a small piece of fruit, a really small piece of fruit, is 15 grams of carbohydrate. A half a cup of cooked oatmeal, not pre-cooked, is 15 grams of carbohydrate. Where else can we look? Let's see, a third of a cup of pasta or rice is another 15 grams of carbohydrate. So if you kind of couple those together, you can get a better idea of what 380 to 680 looks like. All right, so carbohydrate loading. People used to really love this. You may have even done it in high school, had like pasta night with your team. Carbo loading the night before a big event actually isn't a great idea. It can leave you kind of feeling sluggish the next day. You hold on to a little bit more water sometimes. So it's recommended, I'm not going to hold anybody to these numbers, but it's recommended, I want you to know the big picture, is that you're increasing your carbohydrate intake in the days, not the night before, in the days leading up to your event. And you can see the example here is 5 days out before the competition, 5 or 6 days out, you're having 5 grams per kilo. Days 3, 2, and 1 leading up to the event, you're having 10 grams per kilo. And for some, and there's a whole range in between. So for some athletes, all it means is maybe having an extra English muffin at breakfast in days leading up to an event. And the whole purpose of this is to build up glycogen stores in the muscle to delay that hitting of the wall during an event. All right, let's talk about fat. All right, fat is, the recommendation for athletes is 15 to 25% of total calories. And this is a little bit higher. It's close to in line with what regular people should have. But the range is big here because a lot of athletes, especially athletes whose nutritional needs are very, very high, can only get the calories they need if they up their fat intake. They just don't have enough hours in the day to be eating things that aren't calorically dense, that don't have a lot of calories in a small amount of space. So if you think about, there's an Olympic athlete named Michael Phelps, and he needs thousands of calories a day, but he also needs to train for many hours a day. So he is spending his time training, sleeping, eating. So he needs to, when he actually has time to eat, he needs to get the most bang for his buck. So he's going to do that with fat. All right, now protein. And one more thing about fat, you want to emphasize unsaturated fats. So you don't want your athlete saying, oh, good, I can have as much fat as I want. And they have 18 tubs of Ben & Jerry's ice cream that's full of saturated fat. That's not good for their heart in the long run. All right, protein needs. So remember, the average recommended minimum intake for normal people, so for non-athletes, is 0.8 grams per kilogram. Protein needs for athletes are about 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilo. So a lot of athletes are surprised by this. The max recommended amount is about 1.7 grams per kilogram. So I urge you, if you've been taking protein supplements or looking to bulk up, do the math and figure out how many grams per kilo of protein you're consuming. Anything really above that 2 gram per kilo mark isn't really doing you any favors. It's not, your body can't do anything with that extra protein. So, all right, let's look at this example on the right-hand side. So a strength-trained athlete who's in a muscle mass maintenance phase. So they've already gained their muscle. They're finished with preseason. They're actually in their season. They're just trying to maintain what they have. Need 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo. This is what it looks like for somebody who weighs 70 kilos, which is about 154 pounds. In a muscle gaining phase, the athlete needs 1.5 to 1.7 grams per kilo. Endurance athletes need about 1.2 grams per kilo. High intense endurance athletes need up to 1.7 grams per kilo to maintain that muscle mass. All right, now a lot of athletes, like I said, think if a little protein is good, then a lot is great. However, too much protein can actually be detrimental because it means that that athlete, they only have so many hours in a day to eat. They only have so much room in their stomach. And if they're overdoing it with protein, they can't get in the carbohydrate they need for energy. So if you've ever worked out a couple days in a row and feeling like you thought, oh, I'm doing great with my protein intake, but felt sluggish, really tired, having a lot of muscle fatigue, it might be that you're not getting enough carbohydrate. When you're breaking down amino acids, you break off the nitrogenous group, the NH3, the ammonia group, and you have to pee it out. That's the only way to get rid of it. It's in your urine. So if individuals are overdoing it with protein, that means that their kidneys are having to overdo it with getting rid of nitrogen, which means that you're overdoing it with getting rid of water, because the only way to get rid of those nitrogenous end products is to pee them out. So you need to have enough water to get rid of that extra nitrogen. So if you're an athlete overdoing it with protein but not upping your water intake, you could very easily become dehydrated. And then just this last bullet point is that a lot of protein sources are expensive, whether they're meat or poultry or protein supplements. They can be very expensive. It adds up very quickly. And again, you're just wasting those calories. So a word on a few micronutrients. Iron is a big one. So a lot of female in particular athletes will be tested for iron deficiency anemia, and they'll be on paper what appears to have iron deficiency anemia. However, they only have athlete anemia or marching syndrome anemia, which is something that happens in the beginning phase of a season where an athlete is upping their blood volume. So the concentration of red blood cells and therefore the concentration of iron appears to go down, but it actually hasn't gone down. So it's important for female athletes to be tested, but then look at those results with a grain of salt and try and get that extra protein from food sources. They may not necessarily have to go on an iron supplement. Calcium is another big one. So these are important for females, but they're important for males as well. Calcium is really important. You may have in high school heard of the female athlete triad, where an athlete not consuming enough calories would stop having her period because of an energy deficit, which would in turn lead to bone loss. And it would be this kind of cycle. The female athlete triad has now been renamed and redefined as relative energy deficiency in sport, RED-S. This refers to impaired physiological functioning, including their metabolic rate, menstrual function, bone health going down, total immunity, ability to build muscle mass, so protein synthesis, cardiovascular health. And this new relative energy deficiency in sport condition also includes males. So having being diagnosed with a female athlete triad leaves out half the population. So in this population of athletes in particular, watch for calcium intake or an under consumption of calcium. All right, let's talk about water. So we have to replace the fluids we lose through sweat, obviously, during exercise. Depending on the weather, the intensity of exercise, you can lose 3 to 8 cups an hour. And this can lead to heat exhaustion. Some symptoms include sweating and being dizzy, just weak, maybe throwing up. flushing of the skin. You're already dehydrated at this point. Heat cramps come next. This is cramping of muscles, not cramping of the GI tract, not like a stitch that you might get when you're running that's caused by a shift of blood flow in your GI tract. A heat cramp is a muscle cramp. And this is the next step after heat exhaustion. This is dangerous. And then heat stroke is the final step. If you're not putting fluids back, it's when your internal temperature reaches up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And athletes are, this is a very dangerous condition for athletes to be in. So one of the ways to avoid this is not working out at high noon on the hottest day of the year, but also making sure that your fluid intake is adequate. So you want to be consuming enough fluids before, during, and after exercise. So the goal is to not lose more than 2% of your body weight. So if you've ever gone to the gym and weighed yourself and then exercised and weighed yourself again, you're like, oh, I lost some weight. You didn't really lose weight, you lost fluid, and you need to put that fluid back. So the general recommendations are to just be sipping all day long. So don't wait till your event to drink water, and then have at least 2 to 3 cups, 2 to 3 hours before your event or before your workout or before you're going to go exercise. And then a cup to a cup and a half about 10 to 15 minutes before. This is a little bit of personal preference. Some people, I hate that sloshy feeling in my stomach, so I would drink that fluid a little before 15 minutes because I just don't want it sitting in my stomach. And then this is where a lot of athletes kind of drop the ball during exercise. Every 10 to 15 minutes during exercise, you want to have a cup to a cup and a half of fluid, which seems like a lot and it can be hard to do, but you can get a little bit better at it. 1 cup of fluid is 8 ounces. If you're exercising intently for longer than an hour, you have to make sure that that hydration source also contains some carbohydrates and electrolytes, including sodium. Gatorade is a great drink for providing athletes with carbohydrate. It is not a great drink for providing athletes with electrolytes. If it had the electrolytes that an athlete actually needed, it would taste disgusting. So there are other beverages out there that contain more electrolytes. They're not the best tasting, but they actually do the trick. And then if you have weighed yourself before exercise and then weighed yourself again after exercise, and you've lost 1 pound, you've lost 3 cups of water. So you've lost 24 ounces of water. If you've lost 2 pounds, that's 48 ounces of water. So you have to make sure that you're putting that back after exercise. You may have seen this before, the urine color chart. I think it's really, really handy. This is not just for before or after your workout. This is to check in consistently. So I always tell athletes and just in general to have people aim for the color of their urine to look like a straw. So not clear. It shouldn't, if it's clear, that's actually something else going on, which we'll talk about in a minute. The darker the yellow up to this heinous green color is increasing levels of dehydration. Keep an eye on your urine color. Be aiming for these lighter colors when you can. If you realize you haven't gone to the bathroom in a while and you're like, oh shoot, I'm 6 or 7 on the urine scale, that's your indication that it's time to drink more water. All right, so a word on what happens if you get too much water. It can actually be deadly to have too much water. It's called hyponatremia. So let's break this word down. Hypo means too little. So on the flip side, hyper means too much. Hypo means too little. Na is the atomic symbol for sodium. So now you can break this word down and see too little sodium. And then emia means in the blood. So this is too little sodium in the blood. And this condition is deadly and is caused by having too much water in the blood. So if you have too much water, the concentration of sodium goes down. And your muscles can't contract, including the important muscles like your diaphragm and your heart. And I'll say a bit on that in a second. And I've already mentioned this. This says, when would you need a sports drink? This is only if you're working out very intensely for longer than an hour. If you're just going to the gym, not just, but if you're going to the gym for a nice workout, it's about an hour long, water is all you need. You don't want to put back simple carbohydrates and sort of erase your exercise, calorically at least. I want to say one more thing about hyponatremia. This generally, not always, if it's going to affect an athlete, will affect an endurance athlete. So it happened a few years ago during the Boston Marathon that somebody died of hyponatremia during the event. She drank too much water. I don't know if it was the day of or a few days before, but she drank too much water and diluted the sodium in her blood. All right, so let's talk about the best meals and snack ideas before, during, and after exercise. So the best pre-exercise meal, or I should even just say snack, is high in carbohydrate and low in fat. Fat takes a long time to digest. So if you ate something that was high fat, it would just sit in your GI tract and would require, when you start exercising, your body has to make a decision and say, all right, well, we need our muscles to move. So we're going to shift the blood that we had previously sent to the GI tract to help digest or to help absorb nutrients. We're going to take that blood from the GI tract, take a good portion of it and send it to the muscles so that this person can exercise. And in doing so, you can get cramps, GI cramps or stitches very easily. This is more likely to happen with a higher fat meal or snack. So if you've ever exercised after having a donut, for example, it's terrible. So a high carb, low fat meal or snack. During exercise, you want to make sure that you're putting in some carbohydrates if you're exercising intensely rather for longer than 60 minutes. So this is for a long race, for example. You want to use some athletes decide to have a handful of pretzels or a handful of raisins. Some athletes have Gatorade, and some athletes go with commercial products like Goo or Cliff Blocks is another example. These are things you can get at running stores. And then after exercise, you want to try and have a meal or snack within 30 minutes of exercising, because that's kind of the sweet spot of putting some of those nutrients back. So at least having a snack within 30 minutes of exercising, and then within about 2 hours, having your next meal. And you want to make sure that you're getting the carbohydrate you need to put the protein where it's supposed to go in your muscle. So aim for about 1 to 2 grams of carbohydrate per kilo. All right, so these are just a couple ideas. So pre-workout snacks and meals, the goal is to keep up your blood sugar during your event or during your workout, but not upsetting your stomach. Or this shouldn't even just say stomach, this should say entire GI tract. So some ideas include breakfast drinks. I don't think people really drink these anymore. An example is Carnation Instant Breakfast. A small bowl of cereal with some milk and some juice, a small peanut butter sandwich, a little bit of pasta. Pasta with a cup of milk on the side, not poured over the pasta. A really small baked potato with a little bit of sour cream is another example. And this is a lot of trial and error. I would never eat a baked potato before a run, but there are other people who that might be the perfect snack. And that's just personal preference. Then after your workout, the big thing is to replace that glycogen. You want to hit that sweet spot so you can put the glycogen back so that you're not pulling from that bank of carbohydrate before you need to do it. So right after your workout, simple carbs are best. Juice, maybe soda, if that's all you had. Chocolate milk is awesome. Chocolate milk has the perfect carb to protein ratio down here of 3:1. So chocolate milk has carbohydrate from the sugar. So it has sucrose from the chocolate syrup, and then it also has lactose from the dairy. And then because it's a dairy product, it also has protein, and the ratio is just about 3:1. It's a great post-workout snack. And then a little bit later, have all those complex carbohydrates, bread, pasta, rice, cereal, things like that. All right, and then a word on some ergogenic aids. So these are sport enhancers or athlete enhancers. I'm just going to point a few of them out. We're not going to go through all of them. So creatine. A lot of people end up taking creatine. This increases the phosphocreatine in muscles to be able to regenerate ATP from ADP for those few seconds after that initial burst of ATP is used up. So there is some evidence here that it can help with muscle gain. You actually get bigger muscles, but it doesn't translate to better performance. So, and it also can be really expensive. High doses of creatine can actually lead to kidney damage. So be careful with that one. The next ergogenic aid I want you to know about is caffeine. So caffeine is actually shown to work to increase athletic performance. It can stimulate your nervous system, heighten your sense of awareness, may enhance nerve conduction. However, especially for collegiate athletes. NCAA guidelines are pretty strict with the amount of caffeine that's allowed in an athlete. During a random test, the amount of caffeine an athlete can have in their body is pretty small. So that's something to really watch out for if you are an elite athlete. It can also be dehydrating. So if you're drinking coffee, make sure that you're drinking water as well. The last two I want you to know about are illegal. So anabolic steroids, of course, are illegal. They do work. They increase muscle mass. They increase strength. However, they're very, very dangerous to administer, to take, and then they have deleterious effects on your body for a long time after that. And then growth hormone. We all make growth hormone when we're growing. And the idea is if you take growth hormone while you are training, you will grow more. Not grow up, but grow out muscle mass wise. And it's just like with anabolic steroids, the danger comes a lot. I mean, physiologically, it's not safe to be tinkering with hormones. But the use of needles for injection adds another level of health risk. And then this is Lance Armstrong's downfall, blood doping. So blood doping is increasing the ability to carry oxygen or increasing aerobic capacity by either injecting your own red blood cells that you've harvested or using a hormone called erythropoietin that actually turns up your own body's red blood cell production. It works. It makes you carry oxygen better. However, it thickens your blood, and this can be very, very dangerous. And it's actually illegal under the Olympic guidelines. So that's our lecture on sports nutrition. Ask any questions that come up, and good luck.